All right, let's jump into another deep dive into global health.
Yeah.
Today's sources are all over the place. We've got CDC, we've got the Straits Times, all the way from Singapore.
Wow.
We've got some Australian news.
Sure.
So yeah, we're gonna be covering a lot of ground here. We're talking avian flu, malaria surges, even a new virus outbreak.
Oh.
But we'll also touch on some pretty promising developments in food allergy and myopia treatment.
It's amazing how interconnected these health challenges really are. You know, you've got everything from these animal-borne viruses to the impact of like modern life.
Yeah,
It really does kind of paint a picture of just how complex global health is.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with this avian flu thing. The CDC is urging faster influenza testing right now.
Okay.
Because of these sporadic H5N1 infections they're seeing in the U.S.
Yeah.
And it's already a busy flu season. So how worried should we be about this?
Well, the interesting thing here is that while the human cases have been mild so far,
Okay.
the virus is spreading like wildfire among animals.
Oh, wow.
Birds, poultry, even dairy cows. Yeah. And in fact, the U.S. just saw its first case of cow-to-human H5N1 transmission.
Yeah, the article from Infection Control Today really highlighted that cow-to-human case, and thankfully it was mild. But is this a sign that H5N1 is like getting closer to becoming a pandemic threat?
It's a possibility. We definitely need to monitor this closely. Researchers have identified a mutation that could theoretically make H5N1 more transmissible to humans.
Oh, wow.
However, this is all based on lab work, not real-world observations.
Right.
The key here is going to be implementing what they call a One Health approach. And that basically means vets and doctors need to be working together, sharing data, and even doing joint surveillance to catch these outbreaks early on.
That makes a lot of sense, getting ahead of it. What about malaria? Vax Before Travel reported this record-breaking outbreak in Ethiopia, over 8.4 million cases in 2024. That's a crazy number.
Yeah.
And globally, it seems like we haven't made much progress against malaria in the past decade or so.
It's a stark reminder that despite spending billions of dollars annually on malaria control, the fight is far from over, particularly in Africa.
Yeah, I know there are malaria vaccines out there,
Really?
but I read that they're not available in the U.S. Why is that?
That's right. The current malaria vaccines that are being used in other parts of the world haven't been approved by the FDA. Their standards for approval are incredibly high, so that process can take quite a bit of time.
Oh, that makes sense.
But don't lose hope. There are some promising new malaria vaccine candidates in those late-stage trials right now.
Oh, good. Okay. Let's switch gears for a second to something a bit more concerning. News.com.au reported a Marburg virus outbreak in Tanzania.
Yeah.
Now, what makes Marburg so concerning is not just the high fatality rate, but the rapid onset of those severe symptoms.
Right.
It makes early intervention absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. You're right, Marburg is a highly infectious hemorrhagic fever. It's transmitted from fruit bats, and it belongs to the same virus family as Ebola.
Oh, wow. So like Ebola, it sounds pretty scary.
Yeah.
I was reading about the symptoms, and it's fever, muscle pain, rash, but then in a lot of cases, it progresses to like severe bleeding and organ failure. That's scary.
Unfortunately, that's true. The fatality rate can reach almost 90%.
So what are they doing to contain this outbreak?
Well, the World Health Organization is working closely with the Tanzanian authorities. They're implementing control measures, things like contact tracing, isolating suspected cases, providing supportive care for those infected. You know, speed is key here. They need to act quickly and decisively to prevent it from spreading further.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take a break from the scary stuff for a minute. The Straits Times had this interesting article about Singapore's battle against childhood myopia. They're calling Singapore the myopia capital of the world.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of how our modern lifestyles are impacting our health, right? Myopia, or nearsightedness, is a growing concern worldwide.
Yeah.
And Singapore is taking a really proactive approach to tackling it head on.
Yeah, so they're implementing stricter screen time guidelines for children, right?
Exactly.
No screen time for those under 18 months, limited screen time for older kids.
That's right. Prolonged near-work activities, like staring at screens, have been linked to the development of myopia. Singapore's approach really highlights the need for this multi-pronged approach. You know, education, environmental modifications, even potentially policy changes, all to promote healthy vision habits.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that myopia is not just an inconvenience.
Right.
It can lead to serious eye complications later in life.
Exactly. Myopia increases the risk of things like retinal detachment, glaucoma, macular degeneration.
Oh, wow.
These can significantly impair vision and quality of life. So addressing myopia early on is really crucial for mitigating these risks down the road.
Speaking of interventions, the Straits Times also mentioned something called ortho-K lenses. What are those?
So think of ortho-K lenses like a retainer for your eyes. They're specialized contact lenses that you wear overnight to gently reshape the cornea, correcting the vision temporarily. And studies suggest that they can also slow down the progression of myopia in some children.
Interesting. So back to masks. It seems like we're revisiting some of those early pandemic debates. Medscape highlighted a study suggesting that mask wearing could reduce COVID-19 transmission ninefold if everyone had worn them consistently.
Wow.
Ninefold. That's a huge number.
That ninefold reduction is definitely impressive. But there has been some pushback on that study's methodology.
Okay.
It's important to note that it was a mathematical model, so it has its limitations.
Right.
However, it does add to that growing body of evidence that supports the effectiveness of masks in reducing the spread of those respiratory viruses.
So are masks not just a relic of the past? These still have a role to play in protecting ourselves.
Absolutely. They remain a valuable tool, especially during flu season or when you're dealing with outbreaks of other respiratory illnesses. They're a simple yet effective way to reduce transmission and protect vulnerable populations.
Yeah. The Medscape article also mentioned that masks, along with those other pandemic measures, may have even contributed to the probable extinction of an entire influenza strain.
It's pretty remarkable, right? Yeah.
The B Yamagata lineage of influenza B virus hasn't been detected since early 2020.
Oh, wow.
Now, we can't definitively attribute its disappearance solely to masks and other interventions,
Right.
but it's certainly plausible that they played a significant role.
It makes you wonder what the long-term impact will be of those behavioral changes we all adopted during the pandemic.
It really was a massive social experiment. It forced us all to adapt and adopt new habits. It'll be interesting to see which of these changes persist and how they shape our relationship with public health in the long run.
Okay, let's end this first part of our deep dive with some good news. The UNC School of Medicine newsroom highlighted a breakthrough study on a drug called omalizumab. It's already FDA approved, and this research found that it significantly reduces the risk of allergic reactions to peanuts and other foods in children. This is huge for families dealing with food allergies.
It's a remarkable development. Omalizumab is a monoclonal antibody that targets IgE, which plays a key role in allergic reactions. By blocking IgE, it can reduce the severity of allergic responses. So it's not a cure, but it offers a level of protection that goes beyond just strict avoidance.
Exactly. It gives these kids more freedom and peace of mind because they're not living in constant fear of accidental exposure.
That's fantastic. It's incredible how diverse and interconnected these global health issues really are.
It really underscores the importance of staying informed, thinking critically, and recognizing the complex interplay of factors that shape our collective health. Everything from individual choices to societal influences and scientific advancements.
Stay tuned. We'll be back in part 2 to delve a little bit deeper into some of these topics and examine what it all means for you.
Welcome back to our deep dive into global health. Well, we covered a lot of ground in part 1, but there's still so much more to unpack.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that potential for the avian flu, that H5N1, to mutate. The conversation article really dug into that. What's the latest on that front?
Well, it's important to remember that we haven't actually seen this specific mutation occur in the circulating H5N1 strains yet. But the research is still valuable because it highlights that potential, right? The potential for this virus to evolve and maybe spread more easily among humans.
So we're in a race against time, basically.
Yeah.
Trying to stay ahead of the virus.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We're constantly learning more about H5N1's genetic makeup and how it interacts with different species. The more we know, the better we can develop those effective vaccines and treatments.
And speaking of vaccines, I'm curious about those malaria vaccines. If they're being used in other parts of the world, what's preventing them from being available in the U.S.?
It really boils down to the FDA approval process.
Right.
Their standards for safety and efficacy are very rigorous, especially for vaccines.
Oh, okay.
The process can take years, unfortunately.
So it's not that the current malaria vaccines are ineffective. It's more about just making sure that they meet the highest safety standards for the U.S. population.
Exactly. And there are trials underway here in the U.S. evaluating the safety and efficacy of these vaccines in different populations. It's a complex process, but it's necessary to make sure that we're protecting the public.
Yeah, of course. While we're waiting for an FDA-approved malaria vaccine, what other tools do we have to fight this disease?
Oh, there are several anti-malarial drugs are one option. And then there are insecticide-treated bed nets and, of course, efforts to control mosquito populations in general. All of these have proven effective in reducing the burden of malaria.
Okay, good. Let's circle back to Singapore's efforts to combat childhood myopia. They've really taken a bold stance, haven't they? Implementing screen time guidelines for kids is no small feat in our digital world.
It is bold, but reflects this growing understanding of the potential risks of too much screen time, especially for young children whose eyes are still developing.
Yeah, their guidelines are in line with recommendations from eye care professionals worldwide, right?
Yes, they are. Limiting screen time and encouraging outdoor activities are common recommendations these days.
It makes you wonder if other countries will follow suit and implement similar guidelines.
It's possible, as the evidence mounts regarding the link between screen time and myopia, we might see more governments actually prioritizing children's eye health through policy changes.
Singapore's approach isn't just about limiting screen time, though, is it? They're also promoting outdoor activities. How does spending time outdoors help protect against myopia?
It's fascinating, right? We don't fully understand the exact mechanisms yet, but there are several theories that are being explored. Exposure to natural light seems to play a role, as does that increased physical activity and viewing objects at varying distances. That all just happens naturally when you're outside.
Yeah, makes sense.
Sure.
So it's not just about reducing screen time, it's about encouraging a more holistic, healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely. And I think Singapore's strategy highlights the interconnectedness of these health issues, promoting a lifestyle that includes outdoor play, balanced screen time, and those regular eye exams can have this ripple effect, actually improving overall well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember they also mentioned ortho-K lenses. Can you remind me how those work again?
Oh, yeah. So they're specialized contact lenses that you wear overnight while you sleep.
Okay.
And while you're sleeping, they gently reshape your cornea, and that corrects your vision temporarily. It's like a retainer, but for your eyes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So you wake up, you take the lenses out, and then you can see clearly without glasses or contacts during the day.
Yes. And some studies suggest that ortho-K lenses may also help to slow the progression of myopia in children, which is an added bonus.
Oh, that's great. Let's switch gears back to masks for a minute. We were discussing that Medscape article about their effectiveness.
Mhm.
I'm curious about the pushback that you mentioned on the study's methodology. What were the main criticisms there?
Well, the main concern was that the study relied on mathematical modeling, which is a valid tool,
Right.
but, the accuracy of these models really depends on the assumptions that are built into them. And some experts argued that the assumptions in this particular model may have overestimated the impact of mask wearing.
So it's a matter of interpretation, not necessarily that the study itself was flawed.
Exactly. The findings are still valuable, but it's important to acknowledge those limitations. It's part of the scientific process, right? Studies are published, they're debated, they're challenged, and ultimately, that helps us to refine our understanding over time.
And it's a reminder that science is constantly evolving.
It absolutely is. What we know today might be challenged by new findings tomorrow, and that's okay. It's what drives progress.
The Medscape article also touched on that probable extinction of that influenza B strain. It raises a fascinating question. What do you think the long-term implications will be of all those behavioral changes that we adopted during the pandemic? Do you think some of those habits, like wearing masks in crowded places or staying home when we're sick, will stick around?
It's really hard to say for sure. Some people have embraced these habits and they'll likely continue them, while others are eager to return to pre-pandemic normalcy. It'll be interesting to see how individual behaviors, social norms, and public health policies evolve over the coming years.
It seems like the pandemic was a pivotal moment in our history. We're really influencing our perspectives on public health and personal responsibility.
It was a shared experience, but it was interpreted and reacted to in such vastly different ways. It definitely forced us to reevaluate our priorities and consider that delicate balance between individual freedom and the well-being of the community.
Yeah. And speaking of individual well-being, that study on omalizumab for food allergies offers a lot of hope for families struggling with those conditions. It's exciting to see new treatments emerging that go beyond strict avoidance.
It is exciting. Omalizumab is providing this new level of protection for children with food allergies. And it's not just about physical safety, it's also about reducing that emotional burden that comes with living with these conditions.
That peace of mind is invaluable. I imagine it can be incredibly stressful for both children and their families to constantly worry about accidental exposure.
Absolutely. Omalizumab is allowing these children to participate more fully in everyday activities, knowing that they have that added layer of protection.
What's next in the world of food allergy treatment? Are there other promising therapies on the horizon?
Scientists are exploring a range of different approaches. Immunotherapies, for example, aim to desensitize the immune system to those specific allergens through carefully controlled exposure.
So it's almost like retraining the immune system to tolerate the allergen rather than launching an attack.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's also research that is focusing on developing new drugs that can modulate the allergic response itself, targeting those specific pathways that are involved in the reaction.
It sounds like there's a lot of exciting research happening in this field.
There is, and it's all driven by this deep desire to really improve the lives of individuals and families who are affected by these food allergies.
We've covered so much ground already. Avian flu, malaria, Marburg virus, myopia, masks, food allergies. It's incredible how interconnected these global health issues really are.
They are. It's a complex web of factors, biological, environmental, social, economic, all influencing our collective health.
This next part is going to be fascinating. We're going to dive into the ethical considerations and policy implications of these global health challenges.
It's where things get really interesting. Join us in part 3 as we explore those complex questions together.
We've explored some really complex global health challenges in this deep dive. Now let's kind of shift gears and talk about the bigger picture. You know, what are the ethical considerations and policy implications surrounding these issues?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. We're not just talking about like scientific solutions anymore. We're talking about navigating those ethical dilemmas, weighing all these different perspectives, and then actually creating policies that are fair, equitable, and sustainable.
Okay, so let's revisit that whole potential for the avian flu virus, that H5N1, to mutate and become more transmissible among humans.
Yeah.
If that were to actually happen, what kind of ethical considerations do you think would come into play?
Well, we would definitely be faced with some really tough decisions, especially when it comes to things like resources. Who gets access to limited supplies of vaccines and antivirals? How do we prioritize the most vulnerable populations?
It's almost like a real-life version of that classic philosophical dilemma, the trolley problem, having to make choices about who we can save and who might be left behind.
Yeah, it's a grim comparison, but it really highlights those stark realities that we might face in a pandemic situation. And, we'd also have to grapple with those age-old tensions between individual liberty and public health measures.
Right, like mask mandates, lockdowns, travel restrictions, all those things were so hotly debated during the COVID-19 pandemic.
They were, and those debates would likely resurface with even greater intensity if we were facing a highly contagious and deadly avian flu pandemic.
So how do we find that balance then?
Yeah.
Protecting individual rights while also safeguarding public health.
It's a really difficult question, and there's no easy answers. It requires open and transparent communication, well-informed decision-making. And I think a willingness to have those difficult conversations about values, priorities, and the potential trade-offs that we might face as a society.
Yeah, speaking of trade-offs, that malaria outbreak in Ethiopia really raised questions about resource allocation on that global scale.
Absolutely. Malaria disproportionately affects low-income countries, and despite substantial investments in malaria control, progress has really stalled in recent years.
It's a stark reminder of the global health inequities that persist. Millions are still dying from a preventable and treatable disease, like malaria, while we're over here discussing potential avian flu pandemics and breakthroughs in food allergy treatments.
Yeah, it highlights the need to address the underlying social, economic, and environmental factors that contribute to these disparities. Things like access to basic health care, sanitation, education, economic opportunities, it's all part of the equation.
So it's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's about addressing those root causes of these inequities and empowering communities to take control of their own health.
You hit the nail on the head. Sustainable solutions really require that multifaceted approach that involves governments, healthcare providers, NGOs, and most importantly, the communities themselves.
So let's bring it back to Singapore for a moment. Their efforts to combat myopia raise some interesting policy questions about the role of government in shaping individual behavior, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Singapore's screen time guidelines for children are definitely well-intentioned, but some might view them as a little bit of an overreach of government authority, right? Infringing on parental autonomy. So it raises the question, where do we draw the line between individual choice and public health intervention?
It feels like such a delicate balance. We want to protect children's health, but we also don't want to create a nanny state that dictates every aspect of people's lives.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to kind of nudge people towards those healthier behaviors without resorting to overly strict mandates. I think Singapore's approach, which emphasizes education and voluntary compliance, is an interesting model to consider.
It seems like transparency and open dialogue are key in these situations.
Hmm.
People are more likely to buy into public health measures if they understand the reasoning behind them and they feel like they have a voice in the process.
I agree. Building trust and fostering collaboration between governments, experts, and the public is so essential for developing effective and sustainable public health policies.
Okay, let's tackle a slightly more controversial topic, mask mandates. The Medscape article highlighted the effectiveness of masks, but it also acknowledged the political polarization surrounding their use.
Yeah, mask wearing became such a symbol of division during COVID-19, and it's pretty clear those divisions haven't completely disappeared. We need to move beyond just the rhetoric, though, and focus on the science, communicating the benefits of masks in a way that really resonates with people, regardless of their background or beliefs.
But even with strong scientific evidence, some people are still resistant to wearing masks, whether for personal reasons or ideological reasons.
That's true, and it raises those ethical questions about, where does individual autonomy end and collective well-being begin? Do we prioritize the rights of those who choose not to wear masks over the potential harm they might cause to others?
It goes back to that tension between individual liberty and the common good, a classic dilemma.
It is a classic dilemma, and it's one that will likely persist as we face future public health challenges. I think finding solutions that respect individual rights while also promoting a sense of collective responsibility is key.
Let's wrap up with that breakthrough research on omalizumab for food allergies. It's fantastic news, but it also raises those concerns about access and affordability.
You've brought up a critical point. Omalizumab is a relatively expensive drug, and not everyone who could benefit from it will have access, especially in low-income countries or for individuals without adequate health insurance.
So even with these incredible advancements in medicine, we still face those challenges in ensuring equitable access to treatment. It's another example of those health disparities that we talked about earlier.
It is. We need to advocate for policies that prioritize equitable access to essential health care, including these life-changing treatments for conditions like food allergies.
It's been an incredible journey exploring this complex world of global health. We've gone from avian flu to food allergies and everything in between.
It's definitely a reminder that global health isn't just about science and medicine. It's intertwined with ethics, equity, and social justice. And I think recognizing our interconnectedness is so vital as we work together to create a healthier and more equitable future for all.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and left you with some food for thought. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay healthy.